inspect and replace disc brake pads on a rear disc brake system include a jack, lug wrench and jack stands, half-inch drive socket set, a set of hex and Torx bit sockets, common hand tools, synthetic brake caliper grease, hand cleaner and towels, a disc brake piston tool, the correct replacement disc brake pads, a new caliper check valve, and a pair of safety goggles and a protective dust mask. In addition, due to the complexity of the system, we strongly recommend a service manual covering the brake system in detail. Start by parking the vehicle on a flat surface and blocking the front tires. If the vehicle is equipped with anti-lock brakes, the brake system must be depressurized. With the ignition off, pump the brake pedal a minimum of 40 times, using full pedal strokes. A change in the brake pedal will be felt, indicating the pressure is relieved. Remove the hubcap if equipped, and loosen all lug nuts 1/2 turn. Do not totally remove the lug nuts at this time. Raise and support the rear of the vehicle on jack stands. Finish removing the lug nuts. Mark the wheel in relationship to the wheel studs, and remove the wheel from the vehicle. Install 2 lug nuts flat side toward the rotor to prevent the rotor from falling off when the caliper is removed. Before working on the brake system, be sure to have safety glasses and a protective dust mask on. Loosen the tension on the parking brake cables by loosening the nut on the equalizer. This may vary depending on the vehicle you're working on. Disconnect the parking brake cable and return spring from the parking brake lever on the caliper. While holding the lever in place, remove the locking nut. Next, remove the lever, seal, and washer. Inspect the lever and seal for excessive wear, cuts, or nicks. Replace it if damage is found. Using a C-clamp or 2 adjustable pliers, partially compress the caliper piston into the caliper to provide clearance between the inboard pad and the rotor. Do not allow the pliers or C-clamp to contact the actuator screw on the back of the caliper, as damage may occur to the threads. Loosen and remove the caliper mounting bolts. Remove the caliper from the brake rotor and suspend it using a piece of wire to prevent damage to the brake hose. Using a screwdriver, disengage the buttons on the outboard pad from the holes in the caliper and remove the pad. Press in on the edge of the inboard pad and tilt outward to release the pad from the pad retainer. Remove the piston check valve from the end of the caliper piston using a screwdriver and discard it. A new check valve can be obtained from the dealer in the form of a piston seal kit. If leakage is noted from the end of the piston after the valve is removed, the caliper must either be rebuilt or replaced. Open the bleeder screw on the caliper to let out excess brake fluid before turning the caliper piston in. Using a special disc brake piston tool, turn the piston into the caliper bore. Depending on which side you are working on, the piston may turn in clockwise or counterclockwise. If the piston will not move or turns very stiff, the adjuster may be rusted. We recommend rebuilding or replacing the caliper if this problem is experienced. After retracting the piston, close the bleeder screw on the caliper. Lubricate the new check valve with a silicone brake lubricant and install into the piston. Remove and inspect the caliper mounting hardware for corrosion and damage. Replace needed items if damage is found. Inspect the rubber boots on the caliper for damage and replace as needed. Clean any burrs or sharp edges from the caliper bridge using a file or sandpaper, and lubricate using synthetic brake grease. Next, lubricate the sleeves, sleeve boots, and mounting holes in the caliper and reinstall the sleeves. Clean and lubricate the caliper housing surface under the lever seal with silicone brake lubricant. Lubricate the lever seal and reinstall the seal, lever, and locking nut onto the caliper, positioning the lever against its stop. Inspect the brake rotor and have it turned or replaced as necessary. Before installing the inboard pad, ensure the retainer is properly positioned on the piston. Start by installing the pad edge in the retainer tabs closest to the caliper bridge. Next, press down and snap the tabs at the open side of the caliper. If equipped, the wear sensor should be at the leading edge of the pad during wheel rotation. Ensure the button on the back side of the pad is engaged in the notch in the piston. When installed correctly, the pad will lay flat against the piston. If not, rotate the piston to align the tabs. Install the outboard pad so the spring retainer fits into the slots in the caliper housing. If equipped, the wear sensor should be at the leading edge of the pad during wheel rotation. The back of the pad must lie flat against the caliper. Install the caliper onto the mounting bracket and install the mounting bolts. The mounting bolts must be tightened to the proper torque as specified in a service manual. Before attaching the parking brake cable to the caliper, first adjust the actuator inside the caliper. Move the actuating arm through 3 full strokes. You should feel a slight drag on the rotor with the arm fully released in the rearmost position. If no drag is felt, move the actuating arm through 3 more full strokes and recheck. Once a slight drag is felt, reattach the parking brake cable to the lever and tighten the nut on the equalizer. Refer to a service manual and readjust the parking brake. Remove the 2 lug nuts and install the wheel onto the vehicle, aligning the marks made earlier. Following the same procedure, change the brake pads on the opposite side. When completed, lower the vehicle to the ground. Be sure to torque the lug nuts to the correct tightening specification. Check the brake fluid level, add as needed, and install the master cylinder cap. Apply the brakes until a firm pedal is felt. This will seat the new brake pads against the rotor. Lastly, the new pads must be properly broken in. To properly break in pads, make 10 to 15 slow stops from about 30 miles per hour with light to moderate brake pedal pressure. Allow at least 30 seconds between stops for cooling. Avoid heavy braking, except in an emergency, for the first 1 to 200 miles to prevent brake glazing.
Let's review replacing rear disc brake pads. First, safely support the rear of the vehicle and remove the wheel. Loosen the tension on the parking brake cables and remove from caliper. Remove the parking brake lever from the caliper. Remove the caliper from the vehicle. Remove the old disc brake pads from the caliper. Next, remove the piston check valve and discard. Using a special disc brake tool, turn the piston into the caliper bore. Lubricate and install a new piston check valve. Inspect the caliper and mounting hardware for damage and replace as needed. Reinstall the parking brake lever onto the caliper. Install new disc brake pads and install the caliper onto the vehicle. Next, properly adjust the actuator inside the caliper. Reattach the parking brake cables, and lastly, properly brake in the new disc brake pads.
There, see what I mean? It's really not very difficult working on your own car's brakes. The more you do on your own vehicle, the more you'll want to do yourself. After all, why pay somebody good money to do a job you can't? When you're ready to tackle other areas on your car, I hope you'll think of Car Care Seminar tapes. There's a whole series, all with one thing in common, to make you a more successful do-it-yourselfer. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Bill Stern.